Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm a playwright, and I'm also the artistic director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. If you've been to the Conversations from the Alcove before, you know it's a series that usually chats with playwrights and theater makers about art, craft, life, and the world, not necessarily in that order. And also, if you've been to the series before, you know I usually start with an audio description of myself and then introduce our guests. So that is what we'll do. I am a fair-skinned person with auburn brown hair. Today I'm wearing it. My ponytail is to the side, so it's sort of, you might see a bit of it. But I still have bangs. The bangs are still on my forehead. I have brown eyes. I have today my glasses are not brown. I'm wearing my other pair, which is kind of slightly rectangular but still tortoiseshell glasses perched on the edge of my nose. I have red lipstick on. I'm wearing one of my favorite shirts. You might see a bit of it. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. There you go. Showing off my shirt. I love the shirt. It's a black background with tons of flowers. So beautiful, like light, springy, summery, light flowers. And it's one of my prized possessions, even though it's just like a little shirt that I like. Behind me, you'll see a blurred background of you'll see like a wooden kind of door frame, door frame, and you'll see behind me some cupboards, but they're sort of blurred out. They're white, and then you might see patterns of wallpaper, also kind of very edgy. If you were in person with me, you'd see kind of lemon trees, which is what that wallpaper is. But more importantly, our guest today is Regan Moro, and I'm going to read a slight a bio of Regan before we launch in. Regan is a playwright and actor, originally from the North Country of upstate New York. Now based in Brooklyn. I'm very intrigued. And they have a BFA from the University of Michigan. They were an apprentice at the Actors Theater of Louisville. And they're an incoming fellow. I think this is still true of the Juilliard. Okay, cool. The Wallace Anderson Playwrights Program at Juilliard. They're the middle of three sisters. I find this fascinating. And then the funny gay aunt to four little boys and make a mean bowl of pasta. This is from their website. Their play Burn for You was recently received an industry reading directed by Tony winner Danya Taymor. Has been a finalist for the O'Neill Playwrights Conference and received developmental readings at the Great Plains Theater Conference. The Road Theater Company, it's in LA, right? LA?
Yeah.
I forgot about them. And it was a second rounder.
Second rounder, yeah.
For the 2024 Austin Film Festival. They obviously have other plays. They played Tremolo, 2025 Irons in the Fire Project for Fault Line Theater. I won't keep reading because I won't be here all day, and that's no fun. But to say they have plays, they write things, they make things. They're also an artist that we're interested by the time this air in commissioning for a project, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit. Welcome, Regan.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. And so, you know, I always start these episodes with the same question, which has to do with how is a climate crisis affecting your art practice?
Oh dear, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because I feel like with everything that's going on in the world, right? Whether it's, the climate crisis or like the enormous threats to democracy in the US, what's going on in, with Ukraine or with Gaza, it's an interesting balance between like how do you educate yourself and keep yourself really informed, and stay engaged in the news and also engaged in the ways that like you can kind of, make a difference within your own community or within broader communities. And also the need in some ways to like metabolize that stuff, to like get through your day, to do the stuff that like really doesn't matter in the face of all of this, right? Which is like, I don't know, make breakfast for yourself or like go to the grocery store or like, I don't know, go to a friend's birthday party, right? Like, I feel like navigating that tightrope, I mean, maybe, and that's probably just life. And I think that's true throughout so many different eras of history. I mean, I would say that one of the ways in which it impacts my practice is that I'm always thinking a lot about like how do you incorporate something meaningful or something like political or controversial into your work while also like focusing on like character, which is always, I think, one of the things that's the most important to me within my writing. You know what I mean? We're here to tell stories about people. And I think um, the only way that you get people to listen or to laugh is in a play is by presenting them people characters that they care about. But I think on, beyond all that, on an existential level, like I'm like, sometimes if I get particularly too down in the dumps, I'm like, well, why does this stuff matter? What is the point of writing plays when there's so much going on in the world, that when there's so many people being harmed, when there's so much at stake? And I don't know that I really have a good answer for that, but that's something I think about a lot, what is the impact of what I'm actually doing, yeah.
Yeah. Does it affect the form of what you make at all? I'm curious about whether when you face the page structurally, as you're thinking about plays,
Mhm.
uh, yeah, if it enters into the equation for you.
That's a really interesting question, and I actually don't know the answer. And I'm trying to get better about saying, "I don't know," instead of trying to formulate a
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I think that's what I wanna say. I mean, I think what's coming up for me as I consider that is, like, the ideas of endings, right? Like, what does it mean to tie something up in a neat bow when perhaps there's not a neat bow to be found, versus, like, letting something be open-ended, being comfortable with, uh, questions, you know what I mean? Presenting questions to not only the artists in collaboration with the project, but obviously, like, the audience members or the readers, and being comfortable with the fact that there's not going to be an answer. You know what I mean? That's what's coming up for me. But perhaps bigger answer, I don't know.
Which is fine too.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, you're an actor and a writer, and how those two intersect for you. Were the paths always concurrent? Did writing take over? Like, how are you navigating having two kind of artistic identities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, I've written since I was a little girl, and, like, the first thing I ever wrote is I wrote, like, a poem in the 1st grade, and, it ended up, like it was, like, in a poetry unit, and, the poem, and I gave it into my teacher, and she ended up being so impressed that she, like, sent it back to the textbook company that we had, like, used to teach the poetry unit, and they actually ended up, like, using it in their textbooks, which was kind of cool. Um, I've never seen it, so I feel like there are some royalties I'm owed at some point, but it's fine. But I've always written. I was always really interested in it, and I always had like a list on my phone or on like my computer of like plays that I want to write, things I want to do. But acting for a really long time took precedence. I've acted since I was a child. My
Oh,
younger sister actually was also a very successful like child Broadway actress. Um, yeah, so we did it kind of together. And you know, we like I went to school for acting. I went to the University of Michigan, and after Michigan, I went to Actors Theater of Louisville, where I was an apprentice for a year. And that, even when I was there, like one of the things that's required of the apprentices is to write a 10-minute solo show and perform in it. So I did that. Um, and that was really, empowering, and people received it really generously. Um, but it was kind of like every time I would sit down, every time I was like, okay, I think I'm going to write, I'm really going to focus on my writing, I would book another acting job. And, what happened is that during the pandemic, which is, I think, of a lot of people, like maybe a lot of like newer playwrights, part of a lot of newer playwrights' origin stories, everyone's acting career kind of stopped, and I found myself really artistically unfulfilled. And I started writing, and submitting to different writers groups. And I ended up getting into a writers group at Primary Stages. And, you know, that led me to one thing, which led me to another. And sort of eventually, like, it's probably gotten to the point now where I would say writing makes up the bulk of my artistic work. And then I'm starting Juilliard in the fall. So it's an interesting thing. Like, I think this season in my life feels particularly writing heavy, which I feel really grateful for. I don't know that that will be true of every season in my life. If sometimes it'll feel more 50-50 or even the other way. But I feel really grateful for it. I find it so fulfilling and empowering to be a writer.
Cool. Yeah. Do you write for yourself to act in? Like,
I don't actually.
You don't? Okay.
No. I have like no desire to act in my plays. And maybe someday that'll change. I think that like into the plays that I'm working, like that I'm actively workshopping a lot right now, there are probably roles for me in each of them, but there's still so much in development. Like, I don't know that I think some writers have this muscle where they can take themselves out of the writing thing to do the acting thing. I don't know that I have that muscle right now. But I've also heard of playwrights who, like, when they're having productions, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, who've had to step in and perform, which sounds like a nightmare. But also I'm like, that would be funny if that was how that ended up happening,
How that ended up happening. Now, I heard about a production not long ago where actually the director had to step in because this was a play by a playwright that's no longer with us. And so the lead actor was ill, and apparently the understudy was ill as well. And the director showed up, script in hand, and did the show. And I was like, I don't know about that. I'm concerned for this person's well-being. They're doing way too many things. But, more power to everyone. Fascinated by this, that you're not actively thinking about, like, I guess because I'm thinking about a lot of the actor writers that I know are constantly writing for themselves to be in shows. Yeah. They're like writing parts for themselves, and they're writing solo pieces, and they're sort of like this interest in doing that. And so it's fascinating to hear that you're kind of like, no, I just want to look at the thing first and see what it is before if I do step in, eventually it will happen. Where
it might be that I'm really bad at
coming from for you? Like, what's stirring you up? Like, where do they start for you? Do they start with a character or image or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they come from different places depending on the play. I think a lot of times I get inspired by hearing things that are happening in the world or things that have happened to people I know. One of my plays, Burn for You, is about a church in upstate New York trying to resurrect a small child. And that actually happened in 2019 in California. And I heard about that story, and I remember like exactly where I was standing. I remember where I read it. And I just had the thought, I was like, that's a play. And I haven't actually and then I just recently had that experience for the first time since then, where someone told me a story and I was like, play. But a lot more frequently, there are like kind of amalgamations of like questions I'm having about the world, experiences I've had, people I think are interesting. But it always comes down to character for me. I think that if I don't have a sense of who the people at the heart of the story are, and it doesn't have to be everyone, it can just be one person or two people or a relationship, like I'm not necessarily going to be invested in writing that. And I do think that has a lot to do with coming from an acting background. I think the reason why a lot of actors are successful at making the transition to writing is because we have a great sense of what makes characters compelling and contradictory and juicy.
Cool. So it starts from character for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Does the That's interesting. So not landscape, not like the geography of the place. That's not what informs the writing.
No, I would say it starts from character, but I don't think I can start writing the play until I have a sense of the geography of it. Um, Structure informs so much of the writing. Um, I'm a very visual person, and I can't when I'm writing in draft, I have, you can see some of them right here. Like I have these blank walls in my apartment and I put up lots of sticky notes and, act one, this part, this scene that like, and it really helps me. And you can't do that until you have a sense of structure. Um, but then obviously the other thing that's exciting is sometimes you're writing something. I read this thing that Edward Albee said that if you're ever writing and you're writing a scene, you think you know what the character is going to say next or do next, and all of a sudden you have an impulse to do something different, follow that impulse because I'm sure this isn't true always, but what it can usually mean is that you're really like in communion with something in the story, like you've descended to that next level. Um, but that's always what's exciting. You have a sense of structure or character, and then you actually like get inside the playhouse and everything changes.
Yeah, of course. Yes. I think that, what I wanted to sort of go to in our conversation is where I mean, I think I can guess, but and I don't want to guess, which is your interest in intersectional relationships, especially intergenerational queer ones, and your interest in staging those stories. And so, yeah, so how is that presenting itself in your work, and also how is that evolving in your work?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Um, I think that you know, I've had sort of like not a chip on my shoulder, but because I'm so grateful for the plays in this canon. But I think, I've been reading plays since I was like 12 years old. I'm lucky in that I grew up in the state of New York, and so I was able to come see a fair amount of theater. And like, there's this entire canon of like great plays about what it means to be a gay man in America. And obviously many of those, especially like that were written in the 90s, had to do with the AIDS crisis. But we've kind of moved in some ways past that, where there are plays about all sorts of like gay male identities, relationships, intergenerational, different races, different backgrounds. And it's just totally thrilling. Um, and I could sit here right now and name like 20 of those plays. And I really struggle actually, as a queer woman, to name maybe even 5 of those plays about intergenerational queer female or other marginalized gender ensembles. And that's not to say like I don't think I'm inventing sliced bread here. Like I think those plays are being written. I think the issue is that those plays aren't being platformed and nurtured and developed within kind of mainstream theater. And I don't exactly know why. I have some theories, but that's for a different conversation, perhaps. But I think that, like, when Lisa Crone won the Tony for writing the book of Fun Home, which is like one of the only other plays that people are like, yeah, Fun Home. You guys got Fun Home. And it's like, okay, that's one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's about one specific family, that which is, again, I digress, but she talks about the idea that like there are so many different like rooms in the house of storytelling, and like I can't even begin to scratch the surface of telling 99% of those, but I feel like I can scratch the surface of telling one of those, and I have like a responsibility um to myself and to other queer theater artists to try to speak to some of that. I think that like there's, I don't see a lot of queer female relationships on stage, not ones of friendship, not ones of like romance or sex too, like sexuality, or like of mentorship. And yeah, so I think that's something that I want to like put on stage or explore on stage. I'm interested too because there's such a dearth of plays about those types of people. The ones that do exist, like I think they feel a responsibility to present people who are near perfect, you know? And I'm like, these don't represent, they don't look like me, certainly, like who's an absolute mess, you know, or like any of the complicated, flawed, beautiful, generous, selfish women I know or their relationships, you know what I mean? And so just wanting to kind of create more space, like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about, I'm sure you're aware of them, but they're pretty seminal, at least in US playwriting. They they passed away too soon, too early in their career, but the Jane Chambers,
Oh, yeah.
is a famous lesbian playwright, and there's an award named after Jane. And I remember being in grad school. Was it grad school? No, it was undergrad actually. And we did one of her famous plays, which was last summer at Bluefish Cove,
I was just
which
gonna
is
bring that up. Yes.
yes, and it's kind of like it's that play feels, it is of its time, but it also feels like so revolutionary,
Yeah.
and it's really beautiful. And I remember being in it in undergrad as an actor, and we that was an interesting season because we did that play and we also did Clown Nine, and so I
Oh,
think that for me as an undergrad, I was like, oh, there's this other kind of theater that can happen,
yeah.
that's not just about, shall we say, cis male subjects. And so it was really thrilling. And I think that, but I think sometimes about like pedagogy, right? Like about like what people are exposed to or get to do a show about, or when they're learning about the craft, is as important as I think things that, oh, I saw that play, it was on New York once and I never saw it again, or like it had regional production. I think there's something about plays that manage to get introduced or become somehow part of the educational system in some way, through actor training or through director training or playwriting training, that matters. It does matter, because you get exposed to different ways of storytelling. And I think that, just like when I was in grad school, that I suddenly realized, oh, there's experimental plays, and I didn't I hadn't
Yes.
been exposed to them as an undergrad, and so I'm like, oh wow, there's also this other world of theater that, again, was sort of, wasn't mainstream, right? And I suddenly was like really excited and kind of that. So I think there's just something about, like, as playwrights, which I know is just one element of the theater experience, but that we do have a responsibility to create change through what we do by the choices of either stories or characters or structures or
Yeah.
subjects that we're addressing, right?
Yeah, I think I mean, and also I'm thinking of like just on the kind of experimental train of like Split Britches and Five
Yeah,
Lesbian Fingers, and
yeah,
and those are things I was never taught about in
yeah,
college,
yeah,
and um I and like last summer at Bluefish Cove, I think is it Fish Cove or Fin Cove?
it's a Bluefish Cove. Yeah,
Bluefish Cove. Okay, I thought so. It was supposed to receive a revival, I think a couple years
yeah,
ago, and then it just like, you know, and I don't know, it's like I don't feel like social change can be like the main agenda driving my art because like again for me it comes back to like the most primal like sacred part of theater which is like campfire, like telling a story around a fire with a bunch of people. But if it's a byproduct of that, like that's amazing. Like something that is exciting to me going into Juilliard is that one of my teachers is going to be Tanya Barfield. And I saw like Tanya Barfield's plays when I was in high school, and it was the first time I ever saw two gay women on stage. That feels really full circle for me. And also the experience of getting to work with another lesbian playwright is huge. So, um, I have this other play, Tremolo, which is we're doing a reading of it in 2 weeks through Irons in the Fire, and it's sort of an intergenerational like queer and lesbian adaptation of The Seagull. And I think part of the reason, you know, it's not really a direct adaptation of The Seagull. Like there's no shared text. Characters are pretty radically different, but I think I'm aware on some level of like part of the way you get people to buy in is that it is kind of an adaptation of this other play. And though it was also funny, like when I wrote this play, it's set on the dock of a lake. There's actual water on stage, you know. So again, I think it's like there's 8 women and a lake on stage. But when I started telling people about this, like, it wasn't lost on me that like people would be like, oh, so it's like the female, the inheritance, you know, or they were like, oh, so it's just like Love, Valor, Compassion, which again, I
Right.
love both of those plays and those playwrights, and they're not wrong that they're spiritual siblings. But it's not lost on me that you have to kind of also contextualize a lot of, and I think this is an experience shared by a lot of women, a lot of gay people, a lot of BIPOC playwrights, that people feel the need to contextualize you within kind of a lot of like male writers, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, and I think that contextualization can be, it's a way, you use the phrase, it's a way in sometimes, right? So people can go understand what you're doing in a sense, like, oh, it reminds me of this, or I see it in relationship to that. And so people can sort of like wrap their brains around it. But I think it also can become a crutch of sorts, you know, because then it's like you're always in relationship to this other. And I sometimes talk about it in the terms of like of subservience, you know, that somehow as a writer, especially, and I think this is often true of, you know, I know a lot of change has happened, but I still think women face a lot of hurdles. And I do think that there is this strange like, well, let me compare you to this other great, shall we say, male playwright, and
Yeah.
then somehow that validates what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I find that actually, and I know, you know, I suspect that some people find that fine, but I find it a little bit, wait a minute. Why should my validity as a writer be only in relationship to a male writer, right? Like that, and in the sense that you're kind of like, um, you're not being seen for yourself, you know.
Yeah.
And I still think that this is an issue, even though much change has happened and much progress and so forth. But I still see those kinds of conversations come up both critically and also when people talk about plays in general.
Yeah.
Again, especially in the U.S., since we're specifically talking about U.S. playwriting at the moment, in a more kind of mainstream way, and it's just a really, and even among students. I mean, you know, when I teach, you know, I feel like students sometimes they're trying to, like, they're looking at their goal, right? So they're going, I'm aiming for that. Okay, so what are my different models that I can choose from? And then hopefully there are many, but ironically, this goes back to a theory that I have, which I won't get into here, but because it's too long and it'll take forever. But I'll do the short version of it, which is that I think that I think you'll recognize this. Critically, there is something around, specifically around BIPOC writers and also women, that when they write something in the well-made form, they're finally seen as having arrived.
Yeah.
There was a kind of like, oh, finally you stopped writing all that weird stuff. And you
Yeah.
wrote the thing that we recognize, right? And it's kind of, and people do win prizes and stuff like that. So, you know, there's all of that. But I think that because of that, and I think that but there's also this weird thing of like, usually that reference point comes from mid-century American playwriting, which centered. There were, not that women weren't writing, they were, but a lot of the what people call the great writers mid-century in the U.S. were being platformed were men, and so there's this kind of like strange, almost like you're always having to refer back
Yeah.
to an earlier time where the male genius, and the
Yes.
romanticization of the male genius is what's prized, and
Absolutely.
that sometimes as a writer you're asked to emulate that male genius,
Mhm.
and that romantic version of that male genius. So I don't know if any of this speaks to you, but I'm sort of throwing it out
It
to
does.
see what sticks.
No, it does. I love that theory, and I sort of want the longer version too. I mean, I think that, and it's interesting, there's like this joke on do you watch have you ever watched the TV show The Other Two on
Yeah,
HBO?
yeah,
Yeah, they have that one episode in the third season where there's the joke about eight gay men with AIDS, a poem in many hours, like
yeah,
sort of poking fun at the great gay AIDS play,
yeah.
and I mean, I think I wonder, I mean, and this is more of like, perhaps this is a question to unpack with my therapist or something, but like, I wonder if like the impulse to write this play that is it's like 4 acts and it is over 3 hours. Well, it's 4 acts, but the fourth and the third act are squished together. Um, you know, uh, but it's over 3 hours. Like, is the impulse to write that play an attempt to like contextualize my own work within this canon, Um I think on some level I'm actually trying to engage with it, you know what I mean? But it's always interesting to unpack your own motivations, right? Like um clearly I'm trying to wrestle with that in some way. But I also feel like as women and BIPOC playwrights, trans playwrights, queer playwrights, like there is I really resist the 90-minute one set two characters, like I find it so dispiriting, this like push in theater to like really to kind of like compact your work, you know what I mean? Like a packing cube. I get really excited by things that are messy or big or take up a lot of space or take up time, like theater as an event. And I don't know if I'm doing it or not, but that's something I'm definitely chasing in my work.
Right. Yeah, I will say that I'm probably the counter version to that in my thinking over the years, and in that I feel like I think because I think you find something very interesting when you study bodies of work of writers,
Yeah.
specifically playwrights, and so you get like sort of, and they tend to run. It's sort of interesting. Like they tend to run in contrapuntal ways. So if you look at O'Neill, for example, I'm going to mention famous male writer,
Yeah.
Eugene O'Neill for a second. What's
Yeah.
really fascinating about O'Neill is that he started out writing things that were quite economical in a sense. They were big, they were
Mhm.
epic. These wild early plays are just epic, but they're not 3 hours, they're not 4 hours, they're not 8 hours, etc. So
Yeah.
they're kind of like doable in a sense. In terms of staging, although they present
Mhm.
a lot of challenges, exciting challenges. And then his career became late career, um, the plays got longer and
Yeah.
longer and more complicated. Um, and so that's one model. And then the other model is, of course, somebody like Carol Churchill, right? So Carol, who
I love her
has
so
written
much.
who's written all kinds of plays, right? Like,
Yeah.
but for the most part, if you look at the early part of her career, they're like, 2 hours plus, sometimes three, what people might call longer form durational pieces. And the plays, as she's gotten older, have gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. So almost like Beckett, she's kind of figured out a way to compress her poetic sensibility
Yeah.
in such a dynamic way, and you're like, whoa, like how did that? What? How do I contend with that? Right? And the plays are huge, but they're sort of like jewels. You have to figure them out, and they're like complex and strange and beautiful. And so there's this interesting thing that happens. And I think that you can look at many playwrights who've had long careers where you see these two extremes occur. They start out writing kind of things that are shorter, and then it becomes like 8 hours or 6 hours, and then you have
Yeah.
other people that, for the most part, tend to kind of distill. Their effort is to distill maybe concerns that they've been dealing with from earlier in their career and kind of figuring out a different way forward. And then I think about like Sarah Kane, who, which of course we adore and we miss very much in the world. And I think one of the fascinating things about Sarah is that if you look at, there's this wonderful book that Graham Saunders, he's done several books on Sarah, but there's one book that's kind of like a companion to her work. It's a book that features a lot of her interviews and, you know, things. He sort of collected a lot of things where she's talking about writing.
Yeah.
And it's a really great book. And in that book, culled from different interviews, she talks about moving away from, like when she wrote Crave, a clear decision on her part to go, you know what, I want to like not, I'm tired of like, I mean, she'd done so much already. I mean, Cleansed and Blasted and Fender's Law, but you know, right. And so I think that she felt like, she said, she articulates in one of these interviews where she says, you know, I just wanted to like go in a different direction. And she was reading a lot of Beckett. And she said, you know, obviously loves Beckett and it's all over, the imprint of Beckett is all over her writing. And she said, I want to make something different that's not reliant on some of the mechanisms that people recognize, a character or a scenographic sort of thing. So Crave comes out of an impulse to write something for voices.
Yeah.
And then as you get further, and because we don't know what would have happened after, but when you get to 448, which is the idea of staging consciousness itself, right? That you're staging the mind. Which gets you away from, you know, a play like Blasted, which is still very much within a tradition of like there are characters on stage and they're doing things and, you know, all that stuff. So that's fascinating here that sadly that she started to kind of like leapfrog through different ways of expressing what theater can be. So I don't know. I'm also throwing that out there for you in case you wanted to respond.
No, I mean, and I think I find that so fascinating. Something else that was coming up for me was like, you know, thinking about, I was just like rereading, is it called Vinegar Tom, Carol Churchill's plays?
Yes.
And then thinking about that in conversation with like Cloud Nine or, what's my favorite? Oh, Mad Forest, you know, with Carol Churchill. Also like Tennessee Williams, you know, like looking at some of his plays, I think if you showed like he also wrote a Siegel adaptation called The Notebook of Trigorin. Kind of crazy play. Or what's the one? Orpheus Descending is a wild play, you know?
It is.
It does not seem like something he wrote. It's all so interesting. I mean, like, I think that it's one of the things I love about the idea of like writers kind of going in and in and in and in is that, like, I mean, maybe some of it is also like the finessing of one's craft, you know, like the ability to say something in 3 words instead of 10, you know? And I hope, like, I really hope someday to write like a 2-person play that's like 80 minutes, you know? Or like the idea I was reading 448 Psychosis the other day. Like I would love to like be able to write something for just voices instead of like character. I think the thing that I feel strong about right now, and maybe this is like, you know, being a little bit stubborn, is like, I want to do that because I feel called to do it rather than people, you know, I had something, I'll tell you this. So I was at, I went to go see the Donmar Warehouse production of The Cherry Orchard at St. Anne's. Did you get to see that?
Yes.
I thought it was wonderful. And
it's for people that don't know, Benedict Andrews is the director of that production.
And I just thought the actor who played Lepakin, it was one of just these stage performances I don't think I'll ever forget. But I ran into another playwright at intermission who is a man and a little bit older than me. And I didn't know him actually. And our mutual friend introduced us. And he was like, tell him about your Siegel adaptation. So I start telling him about it and describing the length, the amount of characters, the scale. And the playwright interrupted me in the middle of me telling them about this. And they said, "Oh, so you just don't care about your work getting produced." And, I thought that was maybe sort of like not the most polite thing to say. But I think that from a pedagogical standpoint, or like from a sort of like an artist, I just lisped, artist thesis standpoint, like that's something I want to push back against. Like this idea that, good storytelling or compelling storytelling is compelling storytelling, period. Whether it's like a 40-minute piece that stages consciousness for a kind of like limitlessly innovative ensemble, or if it's like a 3-hour play, with a couch in the middle. And I think I don't know if I just said anything that was coherent other than just mostly ranting.
Oh, no, it's all coherent. It's all wonderful. Speaking of like artists that we love or things that are, what is inspiring you these days? Things that you've seen, or things that you're reading, or things that you're watching, or things that you're re-watching or re-seeing, right? That inspiration comes in many facets. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So what's kind of first days?
I'm reading, right now I'm reading Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. Have you read that?
Yeah, of course. I love Anne. So yes.
Oh my God, I love her so much too. Her poem, have you read The Glass Essay, her poem?
Yes, it's so great. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's one of my favorite things ever written. They did actually a theatrical adaptation of it in, I want to say like Australia or something.
Oh, wow. Cool.
But that's just, she is a writer who always inspires me. And an actor friend recommended it to me. And I always find her work just so, she's a genius. I mean, truly, I can't even, once I start talking about her, I get tongue tied. I think that is something that's inspiring to me. Of course, you go see all these things and then like you're unable to like think of something right off the bat. I'm reading James also right now by Percival Everett. That's a book.
Oh, Ray. Yeah.
Really
Percival's so amazing. Yeah.
So amazing. Oh my gosh. It's such an accomplishment. And so sweeping. I think I saw Whitney White's show, Macbeth and Stride at BAM. And Whitney is just such a dazzling artist, every time I think she writes, she acts, she directs, it's kind of just like astonishing, her expansiveness and her the ways in which she is able to kind of she's always defying what other people think of her. She's someone I find really inspiring. Danya Taymor's direction on John Proctor's A Villain was really moving to me. She just, I've heard of that play for a really long time and like it so very much. And she also just cracked it open in ways I was really blown away by. And also I saw the play Becoming Eve at New York Theater Workshop, and the puppetry in that show was really, did you get to see that?
I did. I missed it, sadly. So yeah.
Yes, it was wonderful. And the puppetry in that show was just really, really moving to me. And I think too, this is maybe silly, but Sufjan Stevens' album Carrie and Lowell is one of my favorites, and it just celebrated 10 years. And the storytelling, speaking also to different ways of storytelling, the storytelling he does within kind of an album type setting, which it's sort of elliptical and open-ended, just really thrilling to me. What are you inspired by these days?
Oh, heavens. Well, Anne Carson always. I'm rereading some of her essays because I love Anne so much. And I'm thinking about her now that her diagnosis, she has a Parkinson's diagnosis. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I was diagnosed earlier this year, or maybe late last year. So she's also been writing about that, about knowing she has Parkinson's and knowing she has Parkinson's as a writer and how that affects her, the way she thinks about writing and articulates. But just rereading her in general, seeping myself in her world, and also I'm always fascinated by her adaptations of the Greeks, and so looking at how she goes about doing these very distinctive takes. It's her voice. Her voice is unmistakable as an artist, and so it's. I think when I read Anne, I think maybe you might feel similarly. I think when I read Anne, I go, nobody else can do that. It's like reading Beckett. It's sort of like, well, they're singular. There's nobody like them really, and so you just kind of bow down and learn, right? You try to absorb that. Alice Notley passed away recently. An incredible poet, and a vast body of work, and incredibly fiery and radical and political, and like really just telling the truth in such a sublime way. And The Descent of Alette, her epic book-length poem, is one that I go back to constantly. It's I almost, I think I remember reading it the first time when I first encountered it, or somebody told me about it, and I was like, oh, you can do that, like in a book-length poem, you can make that. And then I just started sort of following her work, and really being excited by the way she changes registers in her writing locally, and how she just kind of tells a thing. She just tells a thing outright. So I've been kind of seeping myself, because she passed away recently. So I'm kind of like going back into my Notley archive and nourishing my soul that way. I think in times that are so fraught, as people say the word, I'm looking for artists that are willing to go to the mat, for what they believe in, but also articulate it in a way that's difficult, and embracing difficulty, because I think difficulty, I joke about this sometimes, but it's a little scary. We're getting into a world of like, I don't know if you've encountered this. I'm sure perhaps you have, but it's you're in a document, the pop-up appears, is this for you? The little robot says to you, you don't have to read this, I can summarize it for you. And I'm like, no, I actually want to read it. I actually want to have the experience of reading the thing, and actually having my own ideas about it and my own feelings, and having communal conversations about it, etc. So I think that we're in a world that's asking us to short circuit difficult thought. And so I'm craving, I'm kind of searching. Percival Everett is a great example of somebody writing things that are difficult, but also incredibly entertaining, right? So I think that I'm searching for stuff that's not trying to make it easy for me as a reader or as a viewer.
I agree.
Because I want to do the work. And I also think that sort of is I'll say something cheeky for a second, which is that it's like really cheeky. But I wrote something, and a colleague was like, "It's too smart," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" I was a little bit like, why can't things be smart? I don't understand. Like, I don't want to dumb it down. Like, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to make things that, and I don't want to read things that are like, that pretending that the audience isn't going to engage in something that will make them kind of make their brain kind of work a little bit harder, or make them kind of, and I don't mean that in a sort of ableist way. I think it's more to do with like intellectually stimulating. I think that for me, that's what it fires me up. So that the intellectual stimulation and the emotional ones are concurrent. So I'm sort of like seeking out stuff that can do that. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that like one of the best pieces of acting advice I ever got was just that like the character is in the contradiction, like that. Right. The reality is like that the most generous people can be the most selfish. The kindest people can do things that we don't understand how they had the capacity to do. And that's something I'm drawn to as well, as in my own work, but also in the work I seek out, is that characters that believe things that are different than I do, or that do things that I can't fathom. Because I actually think, just in terms of like plays that make an impact, like having to share space with people like that, to reckon with their darkness is to also like acknowledge our own, and to reckon with their goodness gives us access to some more of our own. Like those are like the greatest working tools that we have to like not only dealing with the difficult people in our lives, whether it's our family members or friends, but like also with like living in this world with so many different people who believe so many different things, you know? It's so easy, I think, to what you were saying about like the computer asking like, oh, you don't need to read this, I can summarize it. It's very easy to get siloed, to stay within circles of you know, influence or like community with people who share our own beliefs and things like that. And I don't know that I'm interested in that. Something else that came up for me though, as you were talking about things that inspire you, is I've you know, I've been, for some reason this year, I've seen a lot more visual art, and it's been so inspiring to me and moving. And I was just up in residency at Malay Arts in Austerlitz, and I ended up becoming like probably the closest with the two visual artists there. And one of them, Dylan Hausthor, is a photographer, and they just got a Guggenheim Fellowship, and their work is so much. One of the things that's so cool about their work is they kind of pick up pieces of folklore in whatever community they're living in. Like one of the photos that they took that's so amazing, it's of a shed that's on fire in the snow. And they heard in town about a pregnant woman that got so angry at her ex-boyfriend that she burned his house down, and then her water broke and she had to run to a neighbor's house in the snow in the middle of the night while she's just lit a house on fire, and, you know, be like, I need to go to the hospital. And they were so inspired by this that they create a photograph about it. While I was up at Malay with them, they had seen a photo of someone with their hand on fire. And so they actually recruited me, and I was like, oh dear, am I about to either become witness to a huge accident or experience it myself? But we lit their hand on fire, or not we, I lit their hand on fire. It was protected by, don't do this at home, kids, but you dip it in soapy water and then you spray butane, and it actually protects the hand. And then I did it, they did it to me, and you really don't feel anything. Yeah, I just think like the way that they kind of incorporate, we think of photos as so truthful, and they kind of illuminate that there's actually so much storytelling and manipulation, which I mean in the most neutral sense of that word, like within photography, you know.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And a great tradition of narrative photography, right? That
Yeah.
is deliberately telling story, creating narratives for us. Well, I think that's a great place to end on. We're almost at the hour mark, and I promise never to keep people longer than that unless things get out of hand,
Of course.
which things haven't gotten out of hand.
Not yet.
But not yet. But I wanted to thank you very much, Regan. It's been such a pleasure. And if you know, for those of you out there that don't know Regan's work, follow it, seek it out, find out where it's happening. You know, do all the things you do to find out where things are happening. And as you know, if you followed the series before, you know, what I usually do is say so long to you out there in the audience, if you're listening or watching, however you're experiencing this. And then I say offline with our guests for another goodbye. But for now, thanks for visiting Conversations from the Alcove. See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.